The baby monitor crackled to life at 11:47 p.m., and I nearly dropped my coffee mug onto the architectural blueprints scattered across my desk. We'd repurposed the old device after Benji outgrew it, using the receiver in my home office to catch any late-night emergencies from his room upstairs. What I caught instead was my wife's voice, crystal clear through the static. "Mom, he's working late again. Perfect timing." I froze, pencil hovering over the elevation drawings for the Morrison Project. Isla never called her mother this late. Vera Holden considered anything past 9 o'clock an emergency worthy of paramedics. "Good," came Vera's voice, sharp as broken glass even through the tinny speaker. "Use the corporate card for the hotel. He never checks those statements anyway. Too busy playing with his little building blocks." My stomach twisted into something resembling a sailor's knot. I'd been an architect for 15 years, designing everything from suburban developments to downtown office complexes, but suddenly, I couldn't construct a single rational explanation for what I was hearing. "Are you sure about the Marriott downtown?" Isla asked. "What if someone sees us?" "Damon's already made the reservation under his consulting firm's account. Room 1247, same as always. Your father never suspected a thing when I was your age, and Felix was twice as observant as Holden." The pencil snapped between my fingers. I'd known Vera Holden for 12 years, ever since Isla and I started dating in college. She was the kind of woman who corrected your grammar at dinner parties and sent back perfectly good wine, because the vintage wasn't what she'd expected. Felix, her husband, was a gentle man who collected model trains and never raised his voice, even when Vera criticized his hobbies in front of company. But this Vera, the one coaching my wife through an affair, was someone entirely different. "Remember," Vera continued, "if Holden asks where you were, tell him you came to see me. I'll back you up. I've been doing this dance for 31 years, sweetheart. Trust your mother." 31 years. That was how long Vera and Felix had been married. I reached for the volume control, cranking it higher, but the conversation had ended. The monitor returned to its usual white noise, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the bitter taste of betrayal coating my tongue like cheap instant coffee. Isla appeared in my office doorway 20 minutes later, wearing her silk pajamas and a concerned expression that now looked as authentic as a $3 bill. "You're up late again," she said, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "The Morrison Project keeping you busy?" I studied her face, searching for tells I'd somehow missed. Isla Corvan, she'd kept her maiden name for professional reasons, was 37 years old, a senior HR executive at Meridian Consulting, and apparently a more accomplished actress than I'd ever imagined. "Just trying to get the elevation drawings right," I said, keeping my voice level. "You know how it is." "I do." She leaned forward, placing her hand over mine. "I worry about you sometimes, Holden. You work so hard, and I feel like we barely see each other anymore." The irony was so thick, I could have used it as foundation mortar. "Speaking of which," she continued, "I might need to visit Mom tomorrow evening. She's been having some issues with Dad again. You know how he gets with his train hobby." Felix's model railroad occupied the entire basement of their colonial-style home. He'd spent years creating an intricate landscape, complete with tiny towns, bridges, and tunnels. Vera complained about the expense, but Felix had never seemed bothered by her criticism. Now I wondered if he'd been too distracted by his wife's extracurricular activities to care. "Of course," I said. "Tell Vera I hope everything works out." Isla smiled, kissed my forehead, and headed back upstairs. I waited until I heard our bedroom door close before opening my laptop and creating a new folder labeled Morrison Project Confidential. If Vera Holden wanted to teach my wife the family business, I was about to become her most dedicated student. The next morning brought rain and revelation in equal measure. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through 12 years of marriage, searching for signs I'd missed. Isla had always been social, attending work events and maintaining friendships that required evening meetings and weekend conferences. I'd admired her dedication to her career, even when it meant eating dinner alone or handling Benji's bedtime routine solo. Now those admirable qualities felt like carefully constructed alibis. I waited until Isla left for work before accessing our shared cloud storage account. She'd set it up years ago for family photos and important documents, insisting we both have access to everything. "No secrets in this marriage," she'd said, laughing as she showed me how to navigate the folders. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so devastating. Her work calendar was a masterpiece of deception. Every Tuesday evening for the past 6 months showed client dinner, Meridian Consulting. Thursdays were blocked for professional development seminars. The locations varied, but they all shared one common feature. They were within walking distance of downtown hotels. I cross-referenced her credit card statements, which I'd been ignoring for months. Isla handled our finances with the efficiency of a Swiss bank, paying bills on time and maintaining our budget with mathematical precision. I'd trusted her completely, signing documents she placed in front of me and nodding along when she explained investment strategies. That trust had apparently been as misplaced as a foundation built on quicksand. The corporate card showed a pattern that would have impressed a forensic accountant. Charges at upscale restaurants I'd never heard of, followed by suspicious gaps in her timeline. No hotel charges, which meant Damon Vossel was covering those expenses. I knew Damon peripherally. He'd attended a few company parties with Isla, a smooth-talking consultant with perfect teeth and the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences. My phone rang at 10:30 a.m. Mara Hendricks, my neighbor and college friend, calling from her kitchen window with a view of my driveway. "Holden, you okay? I saw your car in the garage this morning. Aren't you usually at the office by now?" Mara had lived next door for 3 years, ever since her divorce from a hedge fund manager who'd discovered that cocaine and day trading made poor investment partners. She was sharp, observant, and had never particularly warmed to Isla. "Taking a personal day," I said, "catching up on some projects at home." "Ah." A pause. "Well, if you need anything, I'm around. And Holden, if you ever want to talk about anything at all, you know where to find me." The emphasis in her voice suggested she might know more than she was saying. I spent the afternoon constructing my archive with the same methodical approach I used for building designs. Every document needed proper foundation, every detail required structural support. By evening, I had 37 pages of evidence printed and organized in chronological order. Isla returned home at 7:15 p.m., carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and wearing the kind of smile that used to make my day. "Thought we could have a nice dinner together," she said, unpacking containers of pad Thai and green curry. "I feel like we haven't connected in weeks." Benji joined us at the kitchen table, chattering about his art project at school. At 12 years old, he'd inherited my attention to detail and Isla's social confidence. Watching him laugh at his mother's jokes while knowing what I knew felt like swallowing broken glass. "Mom," Benji said, twirling noodles around his fork, "can you help me with my family tree project? I need to interview Grandma Vera about her childhood." Isla's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Maybe we can visit her this weekend." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice casual, "didn't you mention she was having some issues with your father? Maybe we should give them some space." "Oh, that?" Isla waved dismissively. "You know how parents can be. They've been married forever. They'll work it out." Forever. 31 years of marriage, according to Vera's own words. 31 years of practice at deception. After Benji went to bed, I retreated to my office and opened the Morrison Project folder. The evidence was growing, but I needed more than credit card statements and suspicious calendar entries. I needed the kind of proof that would be impossible to explain away or dismiss. That's when I remembered the baby monitor. If Isla was going to call her mother for coaching sessions, I was going to be the most attentive audience she'd ever had. I positioned the transmitter in our bedroom, hidden behind a stack of Isla's professional development books that apparently hadn't covered the ethics of adultery. The receiver stayed in my office, volume turned low, recording capability activated. All I had to do was wait. The waiting ended 3 nights later when Vera's voice crackled through the monitor like a confession broadcast on late-night radio. "How was dinner with Damon?" she asked. I was reviewing structural plans for a downtown renovation, but my attention shifted completely to the conversation happening 1 floor above my head. "Wonderful," Isla replied. "He's thinking about leaving Meridian and starting his own consulting firm. He wants me to come with him." "Interesting. And what about Holden?" "What about him? He's so buried in his work, I doubt he'd notice if I moved to another state. Besides, Damon says I'm wasting my talents in corporate HR. He thinks I could be running my own department within a year, Damon says." The phrase repeated throughout their conversation like a chorus in a song I never wanted to hear. Damon says the marriage was probably over anyway. Damon says I deserve someone who appreciates my ambition. Damon says his wife doesn't understand his vision for the future. Vera's responses were a masterclass in maternal manipulation. "Your father was the same way when you were little," she said. "Always working on his trains, always distracted by his hobbies. I learned to find fulfillment elsewhere. A woman has to take care of her own needs. But didn't you ever feel guilty?" "Guilty?" Vera's laugh was sharp enough to cut crystal. "Sweetheart, guilt is what keeps women trapped in mediocre marriages with mediocre men. I gave your father a beautiful home, a successful daughter, and 31 years of companionship. What I did on my own time was my business." I hit the record button and let the conversation flow into digital storage. Over the next week, I became a scholar of betrayal. The baby monitor captured conversations that revealed the full scope of their operation. Vera had indeed introduced Isla to Damon at a charity gala she'd organized for the local children's hospital. The seating arrangement hadn't been coincidental. She'd specifically placed them together, then manufactured follow-up meetings disguised as committee work. "I knew he was perfect for you the moment I met him," Vera explained during one late-night strategy session. "Ambitious, charming, and married to someone who doesn't appreciate what she has. Those are always the most motivated partners." The recordings painted a picture of calculated seduction that would have impressed a military strategist. Vera had coached Isla through every stage of the affair, from the initial attraction to the ongoing deception. She'd provided alibis, suggested meeting locations, and even offered to babysit Benji when Isla needed extended time away from home. But the most damaging revelation came during a conversation about their cover stories. "If Holden ever gets suspicious," Vera advised, "just tell him I need you. I'll back you up completely. Your father never questioned my evening visits with girlfriends, and he was much more observant than your husband." Evening visits with girlfriends. I hired a private investigator the next morning. Mick Sullivan had been recommended by a colleague who'd used his services during a contentious business partnership dissolution. He was a former police detective with the kind of face that blended into crowds and the patience to document patterns that others might miss. "I need you to investigate my mother-in-law," I told him during our meeting at a coffee shop downtown. "I have reason to believe she's been having an affair, and I need to know the details." Mick raised an eyebrow. "Your mother-in-law? That's an unusual request. Trust me, nothing about my family situation is usual anymore." Within a week, Mick had uncovered 31 years of Vera Holden's secret life. The evidence was devastating in its thoroughness. Hotel receipts dating back to 1993. Property transfers to a company owned by a man named Richard Castellano. Bank records showing regular payments disguised as charitable donations, payments that corresponded exactly with child support obligations. Vera had been running the same playbook for 3 decades, and she'd been teaching my wife to follow in her footsteps. The most shocking discovery was a birth certificate for a child born in 1994. Richard Castellano was listed as the father. Vera Holden was listed as the mother. The child had been given up for adoption, but the paper trail was clear. Vera had been living a double life since the early years of her marriage to Felix. I added Mick's report to my growing archive, which had expanded to 127 pages of documentation. Credit card statements, hotel records, phone logs, recorded conversations, and now evidence of Vera's own long-term deception. The folder was becoming a monument to betrayal, organized with the same attention to detail I brought to architectural projects. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed a venue for revelation, a stage where the truth could be presented with maximum impact. Felix Roard's 70th birthday was 3 weeks away. Planning Felix's birthday party became my most important architectural project. Every detail required careful consideration, from the venue layout to the audio-visual setup. Vera had chosen the Riverside Country Club, an elegant establishment with crystal chandeliers and the kind of understated luxury that impressed without overwhelming. She'd also insisted on handling all the technical arrangements for the evening's entertainment, a slideshow of family photos spanning Felix's 7 decades, accompanied by toasts from family and friends. I volunteered to manage the audio system, citing my experience with presentation equipment from client meetings. Vera seemed pleased by my initiative. "How thoughtful of you, Holden. It's nice to see you taking an interest in family events." If she only knew how interested I'd become. The guest list included 43 people, extended family, longtime friends, neighbors, and colleagues from Felix's 35 years as a high school mathematics teacher. I'd met most of them at various gatherings over the years, watching Felix light up when discussing his former students' achievements or his latest model railroad acquisition. He was a good man who deserved better than the wife he'd trusted for 3 decades. I arrived at the country club 2 hours early, ostensibly to test the audio equipment. The venue staff was helpful, assuming I was simply a dedicated son-in-law, ensuring his father-in-law's special day went smoothly. They left me alone with the sound system, trusting my explanation about checking microphone levels and speaker placement. What they didn't realize was that I was also connecting my phone to the audio input, queuing up a very special addition to the evening's entertainment. The guests began arriving at 6 o'clock. Felix looked distinguished in his navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his face bright with genuine happiness. He'd always been a modest man who preferred small gatherings, but Vera had insisted on a celebration worthy of his milestone birthday. 70 years deserves recognition, she'd declared while planning the event. We're going to do this properly. Properly. The word had taken on new meaning over the past month. Isla arrived wearing a midnight blue dress that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. She kissed my cheek and complimented my choice of tie, playing the role of devoted wife with Oscar-worthy conviction. Benji stayed close to his grandfather, proudly presenting a handmade card featuring a detailed drawing of Felix's model railroad. "This is beautiful, Benji," Felix said, his eyes misting slightly. "I'm going to frame this and hang it in the train room." "Grandpa, can you tell everyone about the new locomotive you're building, the one with the working headlight?" Felix's face lit up. "Well, it's actually quite interesting. I've been working on a 1940s steam engine replica, and the detail work requires—" Vera interrupted with a laugh that sounded like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Felix, dear, save the train talk for later. People want to hear about more interesting things." The dismissive tone was nothing new, but tonight it felt particularly cruel. I watched Felix's enthusiasm deflate slightly, and my resolve hardened like concrete setting in winter. Dinner proceeded with the usual country club efficiency. Conversations flowed around topics ranging from local politics to vacation plans, with Vera holding court at the head table like a queen managing her subjects. She'd always been charismatic in social settings, commanding attention with carefully crafted stories and perfectly timed humor. Tonight, her performance felt like watching a master criminal explain their methodology. At 8:30, as dessert plates were being cleared, I approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, If I could have your attention, we'd like to begin the evening's tribute to Felix. The room quieted, 43 faces turning toward the projection screen I'd positioned at the front of the dining area. I'd spent hours organizing the slideshow, selecting photos that captured Felix's journey from young teacher to beloved grandfather. Baby pictures, wedding photos, family vacations, and countless images of him with his students and model trains. Before we begin, I said, I'd like to share something special. We've discovered some old audio recordings that really capture the essence of family relationships. I think you'll find them illuminating. Vera looked puzzled, but pleased. Isla smiled encouragingly from her seat near the front. Felix adjusted his glasses, clearly touched by the effort everyone had put into his celebration. I pressed play. The first few seconds were silent, then Vera's voice filled the room with crystal clarity. All men cheat. At least you did it quietly. Your father never suspected either. The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye in the room focused on the speakers as Isla's laughter followed her mother's words. Good, Vera's recorded voice continued. Use the corporate card for the hotel. He never checks those statements anyway. Too busy playing with his little building blocks. I watched Felix's face transform from confusion to understanding to something resembling structural collapse. His hand, reaching for his water glass, stopped moving entirely. His jaw tightened, but his eyes remained fixed on the projection screen, which now displayed a family photo from last Christmas, all of us smiling around the tree, looking like the picture of domestic happiness. Remember? Vera's voice continued through the speakers. If Holden asks where you were, tell him you came to see me. I'll back you up. I've been doing this dance for 31 years, sweetheart. Trust your mother. The silence in the room was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. 43 people sat frozen, processing what they were hearing. Some looked confused, others shocked, but everyone understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Isla had gone pale, her eyes darting between me and the speakers as if she could somehow stop the recording through sheer force of will. Vera's face had shifted from puzzlement to recognition to something approaching panic. But Felix remained perfectly still, his mathematical mind undoubtedly calculating 31 years of deception with the same precision he'd once used to teach algebra to teenagers. The recording continued for another minute, capturing enough of their conversation to make the situation unmistakably clear. When it finally ended, the silence stretched like a suspension cable under maximum load. Felix set down his water glass with deliberate care, the crystal making a soft clink against the tablecloth. He stood slowly, his movements measured and controlled. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the room's acoustics. "This has been educational." He walked to where I stood by the audio equipment, placed his hand on my shoulder, and leaned close enough to whisper in my ear. "Thank you, Holden. 31 years is a long time to live with a lie." Then he straightened, nodded to the stunned guests, and walked out of the dining room with the dignity of a man who'd finally learned the truth about his life. The country club erupted in whispered conversations and shocked exclamations, but I barely heard them. I was watching Vera's face as she realized her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her like a building with faulty foundation. Felix filed for divorce the next morning. The aftermath of Felix's birthday party spread through our social circle like cracks in a foundation after an earthquake. By Monday morning, the story had reached everyone who mattered, carried by 43 witnesses who'd heard Vera's recorded confession with their own ears. I spent that morning in my office, reviewing the Morrison Project drawings while fielding phone calls from friends and family members who'd heard various versions of what happened. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment, but gossip had a way of adding details that made reality seem almost mundane by comparison. Mara called at 10:15 a.m., her voice mixing concern with barely concealed satisfaction. "Holden, I heard about Saturday night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, which was mostly true. Better than fine, actually. "And Isla?" "Isla is discovering that actions have consequences. It's been educational for both of us. I have to admit, I never liked her mother. Vera always struck me as the type who'd steal your parking spot and then complain about your car." That description was so accurate I almost smiled. "You're not wrong." "What happens now?" "Now we see how deep the foundation damage goes." Felix's attorney had wasted no time. By Tuesday afternoon, he'd filed preliminary paperwork that would freeze joint assets and initiate discovery proceedings. More importantly, he'd hired a forensic accountant to examine 3 decades of financial records. What they found exceeded even my expectations. Vera's affair with Richard Castellano had been more than romantic. It had been financially profitable. Property transfers, investment accounts, and business partnerships created a paper trail that revealed systematic asset shifting spanning the entire length of her marriage to Felix. She'd been building a parallel financial life while maintaining the facade of devoted wife and mother. The child born in 1994 was just the beginning. Further investigation revealed 2 more children, born in 1997 and 2001, both given up for adoption, but requiring ongoing support payments disguised as charitable contributions. Vera had been running a sophisticated operation that would have impressed a money laundering specialist. Felix's reaction to these discoveries was measured and methodical. He'd moved into a hotel immediately after the birthday party, taking only his clothes and a single box of model railroad memorabilia. When I called to check on him, his voice was steady but tired. 31 years, he said. I keep coming back to that number. 31 years of thinking I knew the woman I was married to. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way. Don't apologize, Holden. You gave me the greatest gift possible, reality. I can work with reality. I couldn't work with lies. Meanwhile, Isla was experiencing her own version of reality adjustment. The recording had made her position at Meridian Consulting untenable, particularly since her affair with Damon Vossel had become public knowledge throughout their professional network. Corporate HR executives were supposed to maintain higher ethical standards, not conduct affairs with married consultants. She'd taken a leave of absence, ostensibly to deal with family issues, but everyone understood the real reason. Her carefully cultivated professional reputation was crumbling as quickly as her mother's marriage. Damon's situation was even more precarious. His wife, Monica Vossel, had received an anonymous package containing copies of credit card statements, hotel receipts, and recorded conversations that left no doubt about her husband's extracurricular activities. I might have had something to do with that package's preparation and delivery. Monica's response was swift and devastating. She'd appeared at Damon's office on Wednesday morning, carrying a banker's box and wearing the kind of expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. I happened to be in the downtown area that morning, meeting with a client whose office building faced Meridian Consulting's headquarters. The view from the 23rd floor provided an excellent perspective on the events unfolding in the plaza below. Monica had apparently decided that Damon's public humiliation should match the scale of her private betrayal. She'd waited until the lunch rush, when the plaza was filled with office workers and tourists, before confronting her husband as he exited the building. The confrontation lasted approximately 8 minutes and covered topics ranging from financial infidelity to personal hygiene habits that were apparently less appealing than Damon had advertised. Monica's voice carried clearly across the plaza, ensuring that everyone within a 3-block radius learned intimate details about Damon's character deficiencies. The encounter ended with Monica throwing the contents of the banker's box, which appeared to be Damon's personal belongings, across the plaza's marble surface. Clothing, toiletries, and what looked like a collection of self-help books scattered in the wind while Damon stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Security guards eventually intervened, but not before Monica had delivered a closing statement that would be quoted in office buildings throughout the city for weeks to come. "Enjoy your midlife crisis, Damon. I hope she was worth half of everything you'll never see again." That evening, Isla came home carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the kind of defeated expression I'd never seen on her face before. She found me in the kitchen, helping Benji with his homework, while dinner simmered on the stove. "We need to talk," she said. Benji looked up from his math worksheet, sensing tension in the air. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Why don't you finish your homework in your room? Dad and I need to discuss some grown-up things." After Benji disappeared upstairs, Isla sat across from me at the kitchen table. The confident, charismatic woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she said. "Proud isn't the word I'd use. Satisfied, maybe. Justice has a way of providing its own rewards. You destroyed my mother's marriage." "I didn't destroy anything, Isla. I just turned on the light so everyone could see what was already there." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the table. "What happens now?" "Now you pack whatever else you need and find somewhere else to live. Damon's apartment is probably available, assuming Monica hasn't changed the locks yet." "And Benji?" "Benji stays with me. You can visit, of course, but this is his home. I'm not going to disrupt his life any more than you already have." Isla's composure finally cracked. "Holden, please. I made a mistake, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, start over. Some foundations can't be repaired, Isla. They have to be demolished and rebuilt from scratch. I'm not interested in rebuilding anything with you." She left that night, taking her suitcases and a box of personal items. I watched from the living room window as she loaded her car, noting that she didn't look back at the house where we'd spent 8 years of marriage. Benji came downstairs an hour later, finding me still standing at the window. "Is Mom coming back?" he asked. "Not to live here, buddy, but you'll still see her. This is about Mom and me, not about you. Are you sad?" I considered the question carefully. Was I sad, angry, relieved? The emotions were too complex to untangle, but one thing was clear. I felt lighter than I had in months. "I'm okay," I told him. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time since that night when the baby monitor had crackled to life, I actually believed it. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening when October rain was drumming against my office windows like impatient fingers, they came for what they believed was theirs. I was reviewing structural calculations for a new residential project when the security system chimed, indicating someone had opened the front door. The sound was wrong. Too confident. Too familiar. I'd changed the locks after Isla moved out, but apparently she'd found another way inside. Voices drifted up from the first floor. Isla's, obviously, but also Vera's sharp tones, and a third voice I recognized as Damon Vossel. The trio had apparently decided that a coordinated approach would be more effective than individual negotiations. They were about to discover just how wrong they could be. I activated the security system's recording function and opened the app that controlled the smart locks I'd installed throughout the house. One of the advantages of being an architect was understanding exactly how buildings functioned and how they could be modified to serve specific purposes. "Holden?" Isla called from downstairs. "We need to talk." I descended the stairs slowly, taking time to observe the scene in my living room. Isla stood near the fireplace, wearing a black coat that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Vera had positioned herself by the window, her usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by recent events. Damon lurked near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but apparently committed to supporting his new living arrangement. "Interesting gathering," I said. "Should I make coffee? I think we have some cookies left from Benji's school fundraiser." "Cut the sarcasm, Holden," Vera snapped. "We're here to discuss reasonable arrangements." "Reasonable. That's an interesting word choice coming from you." Isla stepped forward, her expression mixing determination with desperation. "We've talked to an attorney. I have rights to half of everything we've built together. The house, the investments, Benji's custody arrangement. Rights, I interrupted. Another fascinating concept. Tell me, what rights did Felix have to know the truth about his marriage? What rights did I have to understand what my wife was doing with our family's resources? This isn't about them, Damon said, speaking for the first time. This is about moving forward constructively. I studied him with the same attention I'd give to a structural defect that needed immediate attention. He was smaller than I'd remembered, his confidence deflated by recent events. Monica's public humiliation had clearly taken its toll. Damon, I said pleasantly, how nice to finally meet you properly. I've heard so much about you. Well, actually, I've recorded quite a bit about you, but the principle remains the same. His face went pale. Recorded? Oh, yes. Hours of conversations, actually. Isla and Vera were quite chatty during their late-night strategy sessions. Would you like to hear some highlights? I pulled out my phone and opened the audio files I'd prepared for exactly this moment. Vera's voice filled the room. Damon says his wife doesn't understand his vision for the future. Men like him need partners who appreciate ambition. The effect was immediate. Damon's remaining confidence evaporated like water on hot concrete. Vera's face hardened into something resembling carved marble. Isla looked like she was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. You can't use those recordings, Vera declared. They were obtained illegally. Actually, they weren't. I recorded conversations in my own home, using equipment I owned, capturing discussions that directly affected my marriage and family. Perfectly legal according to the attorney I consulted. The same attorney who's been helping Felix navigate his divorce proceedings. I walked to the living room's main light switch and dimmed the overhead fixtures, leaving only the table lamps burning. The reduced lighting created an appropriately dramatic atmosphere for what was about to unfold. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to leave my house and never return without invitation. Isla, you'll receive whatever the divorce settlement determines you're entitled to, minus appropriate adjustments for adultery and financial deception. Vera, you'll have enough problems dealing with Felix's legal team to worry about interfering in my family's affairs. And if we refuse? Damon asked, apparently trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. I was hoping you'd ask. I opened the security app on my phone and activated the lockdown sequence I'd programmed months earlier. Every external door in the house engaged its electronic locks with a series of soft clicks. The window security latches activated automatically, sealing the house like a vault. What did you just do? Isla demanded. I secured my home against unwanted intrusions. The locks are controlled by a timer system that I can override manually, or not, depending on how our conversation proceeds. Vera moved toward the front door, testing the handle with increasing frustration. This is imprisonment. You can't legally. I can legally secure my own home using any system I choose. The locks will disengage automatically in exactly 1 hour, giving us plenty of time to reach an understanding. I settled into my favorite armchair, the leather recliner where I'd spent countless evenings reading to Benji or reviewing architectural plans. Tonight, it felt like a command position in the most important negotiation of my life. While we're waiting, I said, let me share some interesting discoveries my investigator uncovered about your family history, Vera. Her face went rigid. I don't know what you think you've found. Richard Castellano, 3 children born between 1994 and 2001. Property transfers totaling approximately $1.2 million over 30 years. Should I continue? The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the rain intensifying outside. Damon was staring at Vera with the expression of someone who'd just realized his mentor might be more complicated than advertised. You had other children? Isla whispered. That's not relevant to our current situation, Vera said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. It's completely relevant, I replied. It demonstrates a pattern of deception that spans decades. Felix's attorney found the adoption records, by the way. All 3 children. The financial support disguised as charitable contributions. The property transfers to Richard's business accounts. 31 years of systematic fraud. I opened another app on my phone, this one controlling the home's audio system. I thought you might enjoy hearing some of Felix's thoughts on these discoveries. He recorded a message for you yesterday. Felix's voice filled the room through hidden speakers I'd installed during a recent renovation. His tone was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. Vera, if you're hearing this, it means you've decided to continue interfering in other people's lives instead of addressing the consequences of your own choices. I want you to know that I've filed criminal fraud charges in addition to the divorce proceedings. 31 years of marriage meant something to me, even if it meant nothing to you. I hope it was worth destroying our family. The recording continued for another minute, detailing the evidence Felix's legal team had assembled and the charges they were preparing to file. By the time it ended, Vera looked like she'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. Now, I said, checking the timer on my phone, you have 43 minutes to convince me why I shouldn't send copies of all my recordings to every news outlet in the city. Local news loves stories about family drama, especially when they involve prominent community members. Damon finally found his voice. What do you want? I want you to disappear from my life completely. All of you. Isla, you can see Benji on weekends. Supervised visits until the custody arrangement is finalized. Vera, you can deal with your own legal problems without involving my family. Damon, you can find somewhere else to conduct your midlife crisis. And if we agree? Isla asked. Then you leave quietly, and I keep the recordings as insurance against future interference. Think of it as a non-disclosure agreement with teeth. The negotiation continued for another 30 minutes, covering details that would have bored a contract attorney, custody schedules, financial arrangements, and communication protocols. By the time the locks disengaged automatically, we'd reached an understanding that satisfied everyone's immediate needs while protecting my long-term interests. They left together, walking into the rain like refugees from a disaster they'd created themselves. I watched from the living room window as they climbed into Damon's sedan, noting that none of them looked back at the house. Benji came downstairs 20 minutes later, having returned from his overnight stay at Mara's house. He found me in the kitchen, making hot chocolate and reviewing the final architectural drawings for the Morrison Project. How did your meeting go? He asked, settling onto a bar stool beside the counter. Very well, actually. I think we solved some long-standing structural problems. Are Mom and Grandma Vera going to visit anymore? Sometimes, but not like before. Things are going to be different now. Different good or different bad? I handed him a mug of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows, considering how to answer. Outside, the rain was tapering off, and I could see stars beginning to appear through the clearing clouds. Different honest, I said finally. And that's always better than the alternative. Benji nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. We spent the rest of the evening working on his art project, a detailed drawing of our house that captured every window, door, and architectural detail with remarkable accuracy. It looks perfect, I told him, as he added the final touches. It's home, he said simply. Home should always look perfect. I couldn't argue with that logic. As I tucked him into bed an hour later, I realized that for the first time in months, our house actually felt like home again. The foundation was solid, the structure was sound, and the future looked brighter than it had in a very long time. Some buildings could survive any storm, as long as they were built on solid ground.